Okay, this tutorial is specifically about 2D, 3D integration and using Cinema 4D in After Effects. You might not all be interested in that, but I do think it's important to know that you have access to this software. This is not going to be a tutorial that actually teaches you how to use Cinema 4D. It's that deserves its own time and attention, but it will show you the basic function and how After Effects and Cinema 4D interact with each other. Just a heads up, the audio and the visual is not exactly going to line up. I didn't. I thought I would be able to include the visual of myself in the corner, but when I tried that, it actually ended up losing the audio. So I'm going back and I'm recording my voice while watching this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the 3D just to create another reference to rotoscope over top of that reference. I want to create sort of a geometric shape that replaces the green ball. So what I can do to start Cinema 4D is go to File, New, Max on Cinema 4D file. This is going to start Cinema 4D. I can place it in my project folder. I can make a new folder called Cinema 4D. And it's probably going to ask you to make an account before you're able to actually access it. So once you open up Cinema 4D and once you've made an account, it's pretty similar to Maya in regards to just like you move things, you select vertices, and you have faces. But Cinema 4D is a lot heavier for motion graphics. I'm going to click on that shape and I can get a cube. If I hold down on that, then I can get other shapes. So once I save it, it's automatically imported into my After Effects project panel if I went through File, New, Cinema 4D Project. I can drag that panel down onto the timeline, and now I have my cube overlaid in my After Effects footage. I can come back in here to the Cinema 4D file, and when I make changes in the Cinema 4D file, they're going to appear in the After Effects file. So I move my cube. And I want to center my cube and scale out a little bit. So I save the project. Now when I go back to After Effects, you can see it's reflected in my file. So you don't move the file in After Effects, you don't move the composition in After Effects, or else it's going to say that error message. But you can see how this will really help with lining up 2D and 3D animations. I can create a new shape layer and I can just draw on top. And so I can start to layer things in between my 2D and my 3D. So for this next section, I rotate the cube 90 degrees in 24 frames a second. And so I do set some key points. I go to the very beginning and I set a key point, and then I go 24 frames in, and I rotate it and set another key point. So it's going to loop. I want to create a rotation that continuously loops. And because 90 degrees is the point at which it looks the same, all I need is 90 degrees. And I could have done 12 frames a second. Actually, what I end up doing later is I cut it down to 12 frames a second instead of 24 frames a second. I do need to remove the easing on this so that it does loop seamlessly. For those of you who use 3D, you know often with animation in 3D it automatically puts an ease on your object, and I'm going to remove that so we don't have the continuous ease. I decided I wanted a shape that was a little more complex than just a cube, so I came back into Cinema 4D and I made two triangles, one on, or two pyramids, one inverted on the other. So I'll save my project. And I'm just bringing it into an empty project right now. What I want to do is I want to export this footage into an MP4 so that I'm able to take it into Photoshop and rotoscope over it in Photoshop. So I'm gonna drag my end work area right there, and then if I right click, I can trim comp to work area. So we'll open Adobe Media Encoder. We'll go to Composition, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. And it popped up in our queue. We want to make sure it's H.264, and we want to know the location that it's being saved at. I'm going to put it under Footage. And I'll hit play to make it render. (1920 by 1080). I break down quickly how I kind of go about doing this in a quick way. Yeah, I just wanted to use this strange geometric shape as a reference to have something else to rotoscope. So I start adding my frames and I copy and paste. And here I just make 24 frames to match the amount of time of my footage. Then I remember that my final video is actually going to be 12 frames a second. So I come back in here and I decide to change it to 12 frames. So I make 2s on 24 frames a second. So it's really just 1s on 12 frames a second. 12 frames could fit into 24 frames a second. The 24 frames cannot fit into 12 frames a second, if you get kind of what I mean. I've sped up this section and I just want to show my workflow for rotoscoping the shape. This first part, all I do is I trace the perimeter of the shape for every frame. And I'll worry about the interior lines after I've traced the perimeter and after I've created the fill. In this part, I'm creating my base layer. Basically the same thing, the base layer of my hand. I'm creating the fill for the shape. So there's a nice process or like flow of buttons to do this. You can do W, which will select your magic wand tool. And I want to select my top layer, select W, so I'm selecting all of the negative space. Then I select inverse, move down to my bottom layer, and I fill in my my shape with G, the fill tool. Then I go back to W for the magic wand, select the negative space in the top layer, change to inverse, fill the bottom layer, and deselect. And I just keep doing that for the rest of my frames. Here in this last part, I reduced the opacity on my fill layer so that I can go back to my detail layer and draw the line work. I want to draw the edges of the shape so we get that distinction when it starts to rotate. This next part y'all should be familiar with because we are more or less just doing the same thing we did before. I'm going to import my geometric Photoshop document, the rotoscope that I created. Since I made it in my timeline, if I double click on the composition, we can see that I've got my detail and my base as my compositions, and I can go inside of each one of them to access those. A quick thing to make note of, this is a really useful trick. If you are not necessarily working in the timeline, but you're working with a bunch of layers in Photoshop, when you bring them in, they're all going to be stacked, and it might look something more like this rather than that stair step that we have. And if we were to play this, it's not going to look like anything's happening because we just have all of the layers all the time. And if we want to sequence our layers in the proper order, there's a pretty easy way to do it actually. So we will select our layers that we want, and you have to select them in the order that you want them to play. So I select from frame 1 to frame 12. I'm working at 2 frames a second, so I'm going to move to 2 frames, and then I can drag this back here. Now I will right click on my layers. I'll say keyframe assistant, sequence layers. Okay. And now that automatically puts my frames in the proper order. So I'm going to come back out here to my geometric, and I'm just going to place the carpet texture underneath, and underneath here as well, and I'll do my alpha layers. And I had already picked out some colors that I liked. This is going to be my detail color. And so I like that a lot. I'll come back into my handful composition. I'm going to drag my geometric layer into here. And it's much too large. This isn't exactly what we want, so we can scale it down. That's probably more of the size that I want. And I'm going to not worry about the detail, the shadow lines right now, because remember we used a mask for that when we were using the circle. So we'll make the we'll make the geometric shape move first, and then we'll go back and we'll correct the mask. We do have a problem. The geometric shape doesn't last as long as we need it to. It disappears right here, and we can see we at least want it to go to this endpoint right here. So actually, I'm going to jump back into this composition. I can just double click on it. I'm going to go to Command K, to open composition settings, or I can just go to these three little bars, composition settings, and I definitely don't. Let's double check the frame rates. So first I want to make this. I want to make it, let's say, 5 seconds. But now we also need to double check the frame rates. So this should be at, what did we have? 12 frames per second. And our carpet texture is great, but we still need more time on the detail and the base. So I'm going to go in here, and I actually want to double check the frame rate on this as well. Okay, so the frame rate is off. Let's change this to 24 frames a second. And we're going to need to actually do exactly what I just talked about, sequencing the layers. Because we changed the frame rate, the frames are a little bit strange now. So you can see with my playhead, actually, while I'm moving my playhead across, this is where one frame should be, but my frame is lasting slightly longer than that. So I could drag that back to there if I wanted. My second frame is not starting where it should. It should really be starting right here. And it's because, so I'm having this issue because these weird like gaps, because I adjusted the frame rate, but my frames that I have, they're still existing, like they're still set to 29.97 frames per second. So I just need to get them to work in 24 frames a second instead. So I'm going to drag them back. And I can shift select all of them and shorten them. And now if I go to keyframe assistant, sequence layers, now each one is actually just 1 frame long and exactly how I want it. But remember, we actually were working on 2s, and so we can drag this out, make those all 2s, and then keyframe assistant, sequence layers. And now we have it back to 1 whole second long. So we need to do that also with the base layer. So we'll change that. And with this we could pull them all back to the beginning, and we can shorten them. I did that with Option right bracket, or just drag them back. Let's make them 2s. Make sure that I've selected from 13 up to 24 so that it's spinning in the right direction. Sequence layers. And there we go. So now when I go back to here, I should have that. Perfect. I'm gonna shorten my carpet layer, and again that's Option right bracket, and I'm also gonna shorten this one. Now if I Shift select, Command C, Shift select, let's make sure that we're selecting all of them. Shift select, Command C, Command V. It's pasted on top. I'm just gonna move this down. Command C, Command V, paste on top. And remember, this is just so that we get enough of our content of our shape rotating. So now when we go back to hand full, we can drag this out a little bit further and we'll have enough content. I want to set a keyframe for the geometry, for position, And let's say I also want to make it rotate as well, so I'm going to do rotation as well. And I'll take it to here. Let's say I want it to maybe rotate that far and all the way up. Let's make it rotate a little bit more. Let's anchor it. If I hit U, that will bring up all the properties that I have put keyframes on, so rotation and position. So I want to actually make this geometric form go slower. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this layer back towards this way. I'm leaving the circle here, and I have that there to use it as a marker. I can kind of remember, okay, this is where I want my geometric form to start, but I'm going to pull it back here, and if I need to, I can adjust that, and I'm going to drag my keyframes that I have. I'm going to push them out further, and this is going to make the geometric form, of course, go slower. So now when I move this back to its start position, the geometric form is moving slower. Let's actually do one more thing. Let's do some easing. So I'm gonna right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. So that just makes it a nicer ease out. I like that more. So now, okay, take it back. Our problem, of course, is that it's being cut off. We don't like it. We'll need the geometric form to stop suddenly, and we actually want it to continue. We don't just want it to disappear. We want it to go all the way out. So now what we can do is I can duplicate this. I'm going to shorten this back to about right there. I'm going to drag it all the way, remove one frame, start it back at the beginning. So now when I play, I have the end, which connects to this beginning. And because I already set the keyframes down here, I already slid them down. When I duplicated it, the keyframes that are actually over here to the right are these same keyframes right here. So now when I play it, it should go smoothly. Does that make sense? I hope. So now what we need to do is, where did we find that mask layer? Okay, so it's right there. I'm pretty satisfied with the movement of the geometry. If I did want to change any of the movement of the geometry right now, like if I wanted to change this and I wanted it to start sooner, that's actually going to cause a problem for the duplication. So now watch what happens. I have that little jump. That's because I changed the timing in this part, but I didn't change the timing in this part over here. So I would, if I want this instead, then I would need to delete this, duplicate this, move that back, and now it should line up again because I'm using the same timing. Looks like we have a we didn't get rid of that one frame that we had left over. So and let's come back, zoom in, and I need to make sure my mask for everything is working. So the mask for the hand, we can already see there's a little bit that's peeking out. So let's fix that. I'll hit U to bring up my keyframes. So what I'll probably do here, what should I do here? I'll probably come back and I'll add a mask to the geometric shape just so we kind of can cut that part off. But mask here. Alright, and that gets rid of that. Let's do this mask. So hit U, bring up these. So we need to get rid of that. I'm going to change the color of this so I can see it better. Way over here, let's move it back. If you remember when I was working with the circle, I had put it to the side. I think you can just go over here again. Here we are. And I'm going to add a mask here. It's okay. Not sure what the best way is to. We probably actually should have. I should have put made the geometric shape a little bit smaller, so that we didn't have this strange part with it being cut off. But I'll bring up the mask path. And here, oh, tiny piece here. It's pretty good. There we go. So all done with the composite of our second rotoscope piece using masks.